Diana Watson, a young and beautiful woman, shocked the world by admitting her mother-in-law to a nursing home while her husband was away on business. Upon discovering everything through a letter, the man prepared a disturbing surprise for his wife's birthday. Larry and Diane Watson had been married for only 3 years, but the relationship was no longer as it was in the beginning. They respected each other and cared for one another, but over time, the couple lost some of the illusions that had kept them together. Additionally, things were not going well for Larry at work. When they got married, it seemed like his ideas would exponentially increase their standard of living. But that's not what happened. Working as a computer engineer for a multinational corporation, Larry's salary quickly reached a limit within the company, and he couldn't get either new raises or higher positions. They had a good life together, but nothing like what Diana thought it could be when she met that man full of promises and potential. It was during a conference in the 3rd year of Larry's graduation that Diana saw him for the first time. The campus was hosting a business and technology event. And as he entered the hall, Larry was greeted by a beautiful and well-dressed young woman who easily captured his attention. It was Diana, who worked as a receptionist at the event. At the time, Diana had no interest in attending college, but she needed money to socialize and attend high society parties. So she found an opportunity in the world of events. She dreamed of a day when a man with enough money would take her out of that simple and hopeless life. When she saw Larry enter the hall and approached him, she was just doing her job and being friendly as the occasion required. But seeing the young man's eyes run over her, she realized he was a good-looking and educated man. So she decided not to put up too many barriers when he asked to meet after the event. During the first dinner, Diana understood that his family was very well off, and the boy was focused on pursuing his own goals. Therefore, he seemed to be a great candidate to give her a dignified and deserving future of her beauty. But now, after 3 years together, the wife was tired of feeling like she hadn't progressed in life. By this time, she swore she would be taking vacations twice a year and undergoing plastic surgeries and aesthetic procedures she deemed possible, and especially that she would have her own house with a pool, since she had been renting since she moved in with Larry. To top it off, her husband's mother, Donna Marta, lived alone in a large and old house in a neighborhood that had appreciated greatly over the years. The house had 2 floors, a garden, and a pool, but it lacked maintenance and minor renovations. Donna Marta suffered from osteoporosis, which made her have mobility problems and remember little bits of her day. In Diana's opinion, Marta's house was too big for an elderly woman with health problems, and she kept suggesting that Larry admit her to a nursing home so she would have caregivers nearby, and the company of other seniors would improve her quality of life, as she said. But Larry was never comfortable with that idea. He wanted to be present in his mother's life and not delegate the task of caring for her to a group of strangers. One afternoon, after another blackout from Donna Marta, Larry was forced to interrupt an important work meeting and rush to his mother's house. Upon arrival, he noticed that the crisis had passed and his mother was better. The young man made sure she would be okay and returned home. Diana immediately came to meet him, claiming that he was being irresponsible for not considering her suggestion to admit his mother to a nursing home. "She's a fragile old woman, Larry, and if she tries to go down the stairs and falls with osteoporosis, a fall like that could cost her her life." In Larry's view, Diana seemed genuinely concerned about his mother's health and well-being. The woman then suggested that he could sell Marta's house and use some of the money to take care of the elderly woman, and there would still be enough left for the 2 of them to travel and put a down payment on a new house, just for them. Finally, she moved away from Larry and, without any shame, suggested, "Think carefully, and I promise you a night to remember." Larry smiled and thought for a few minutes until he made a proposal to his wife. He would agree to convince his mother to put her house up for sale. With the money, they would find a more modern house in a less valued neighborhood for the 2 of them, take a couple's trip, and he would still have money to invest in the development of an app, becoming a business partner, promising to invite an old college friend. But all this with one condition: that Donna Marta would move in with them in the new house. Diana, obviously, didn't like the idea of moving to a neighborhood of lower status and, especially, of living with her mother-in-law, but she was excited about the real possibility of traveling and having a house in her name. So she accepted the proposal, ignoring the consequences that decision would have in the very near future. Now, all that was left was to convince Dona Marta that it was a good idea. At first, the elderly woman was not interested in living with the couple. She said they would need privacy and that having a sick woman around would only bring headaches. Despite everything, she was happy alone. But mothers don't see how risky all this is, Larry said. Furthermore, this house is too big for you to take care of. Dad made me promise I'd look after you, and that's what I intend to do. I won't disappoint Dad, Larry said. After weeks of persistence, Mrs. Marta gave in and accepted the whole plan proposed by her son. The house was sold quickly, due to high demand in the area, and for a price higher than expected. With the profit, Larry and Diana made a down payment on their own house. Diana insisted on finding a house designed by a modern architect, so she could proudly showcase their home on social media. The house had 2 suites on the 2nd floor and 1 bedroom on the 1st floor. The master suite was taken by the couple. Diana managed to persuade Larry to leave the 2nd suite free for guests, and who knows, to become the room for their first child. The common room on the 1st floor was taken by Mrs. Marta, which seemed reasonable at first, since she wouldn't need to go up and downstairs every day. The following week after the move, Larry quit his job to take on a partnership position in the company started with his friend. Now, Larry Watson finally felt fulfilled and in the right place for the first time since he graduated. From that moment on, he was his own boss. To celebrate, he took 2 weeks off before starting work. He hired a nurse to stay with his mother at home and took Diana to the Bahamas, an unforgettable and romantic trip. Diana was on cloud 9. She had always dreamed of the Caribbean sun and sea, and now, finally, she could enjoy it all without any worries. Deep down, she knew she wouldn't be able to live under the same roof as her mother-in-law for long, but she decided not to worry about it yet, especially while enjoying expensive drinks and lounging in the hotel's infinity pool. Upon returning from their vacation in the Bahamas, Larry delved into his new role at the company. Now he worked more hours than before, but he was happier since he was working for himself. When he went to the office or needed to travel for business, he felt less apprehensive about receiving a phone call alerting him that his mother wasn't well, as she would be under his wife's care. But the fact was that Diana never invited or included the elderly woman in her activities and outings. They didn't even have meals together, despite living in the same house. Consequently, Mrs. Marta stayed secluded in her room practically all day, only coming out to eat and use the bathroom. As the months went by, the happiness that Diana had restored with the trip to the Bahamas gave way to growing resentment, and the woman felt annoyed by having to tolerate her mother-in-law wandering around their home. One night, Diana prepared a simple dinner and took it to Mrs. Marta in her room. The elderly woman was surprised and thanked her for the unexpected kindness. While Mrs. Marta ate, Diana took the opportunity to ask if she would consider living in a place with more assistance and surrounded by people her age, where she would have nurses ready for any eventuality. Mrs. Marta understood what the young woman meant and said she never wanted to be a burden to the couple, and she had warned in advance that living with them could harm the relationship they had. Finally, Diana realized that she wouldn't be able to live under the same roof as her mother-in-law for long. The lady said she did consider the possibility of going to a nursing home, as long as it was her son's wish. By this time, the app that Larry and his partner developed was gaining more users and market value, forcing Larry to travel more frequently and leaving Diana and Mrs. Marta increasingly alone. On one of these trips, Mrs. Marta fell ill and had a long blackout episode. Diana felt that she should deeply seize that unfortunate event to put her plan into action. It was now or never. When Mrs. Marta regained consciousness hours later, she was confused for a moment. The room was dark, and she didn't recognize where she was. Her room looked different. It took her a few seconds to realize she wasn't home anymore. On the bedside table, Mrs. Marta found a letter signed by Larry Watson, her son. In the letter, he said that, for her own good, he asked Diana to take her to the best security clinic in town so she would be protected and supported until he returned from a long business trip. Once together, they would find a solution to that problem. Even at the time of her husband's death, Mrs. Marta had never felt such a bitter taste of loneliness as she did in that dark and unfamiliar room. Trying to hold back the tears, what she wanted most was her life back, in peace, in her old home, but unfortunately, that was just an impossible dream. 3 weeks later, Larry Watson returned from his trip and found his wife by the pool. He brought with him 2 bags, one with a gift for his mother and the other for his wife. Immediately, his wife came to him and saw it was a beautiful leather bag. Asking Diana where her mother was, the wife went to the room and returned with an envelope in hand. "I'm sorry, darling," she said. I tried to stop her, but she was determined. Larry opened the envelope and found a letter signed by Mrs. Marta, asking her son to forgive her for leaving while he was away, but that now she was enjoying the company of other elderly people. In the letter, the lady also asked him not to be angry with Diana. "I insisted she not worry about your trip, so please, be happy for me here. We have games and activities throughout the day besides. The nurses treat us with kindness and respect and take us for fresh air in the garden whenever we ask. As proof of my happiness here, I ask you to move on with your life and let go of the promise you made to your father. I am a grown woman and I can handle myself very well, my love. See you at the end of the year for the Christmas festivities," Marta said, ending the letter. Larry was confused and disappointed, as he believed he was doing everything to have his mother close, despite his busy work schedule. Diana massaged Larry's shoulders and said that women are like that, they go through phases, and the right thing to do is to respect the space they ask for. "Well, since you brought me a gift, why don't we open a wine and I'll make you relax and forget about this, huh?" Diana said mischievously. "But look, don't forget that my birthday is coming up. This year we have reasons to celebrate in style," the woman concluded. Truth be told, if Diana had reported what was going to happen, she would never have planned a party that year. A few weeks later, Larry was in the office when his phone rang from an unknown number. He didn't answer at first, but it didn't take long for the phone to ring again. Irritated, he picked up the phone and it was from the nursing home, informing him that his mother had another blackout episode and wasn't well. Larry dropped everything at the office and hurried to his mother. When he got there, he found Mrs. Marta being medicated. With a totally exhausted and sick expression, almost unable to speak. The doctor explained that the crisis had been longer and more intense this time. When she came to, she was confused and repeated many times that she wanted to go to her home or her son's house. "So we decided to call you," the doctor said. Larry spent the rest of the day at the nursing home with his mother, waiting for her to get better. It was already night when he could talk to Mrs. Marta for the first time. She was very sad and said, "Why didn't the young lady come to visit me earlier?" Larry told her, saying he was respecting her wish to rest and not be disturbed, as she had made clear in the letter. "What letter?" "I didn't write any letter," Mrs. Marta replied, handing Larry the letter she had found in her room 2 months earlier. Larry didn't want to believe what he was reading. For a few minutes, he didn't accept that his wife was capable of inventing such a lie, especially involving his mother and a promise he had made on his father's deathbed. But now it was all explained. Leo hugged his mother and asked her to rest a lot that night, promising to come back for her soon. From inside the car as he drove home, Larry called his lawyer and said that, in 4 days, it would be Diana's birthday and he intended to give her the biggest surprise of her life. For days flew by like the wind, and Diana was on cloud 9 on her dream birthday. She walked through the hall greeting the guests like a true socialite. The young woman made a point of insinuating to her old friends that life had been generous to her. Larry was impeccable. He wore a new suit and shiny shoes, bought a 3-tier cake, balloons, and recommended a beautiful decoration for the event, which went smoothly. The guests were impressed. After all, the couple had never thrown such a big party. Not even their wedding had been so well planned. And Diana was loving it all. At one point, the music stopped and Larry took the floor. He said that it was a special date of a year that was very important for the couple. The first reason to celebrate was Diana's birthday, of course. Upon hearing this, the adorned woman nodded to the guests. The other reason was an announcement he wanted to make. The app he and his partner developed would be sold to investors for $8 million. Upon hearing the news, Diana put her hands to her mouth and felt her heart race. She celebrated as if that news were a birthday present. In her mind, she already saw herself driving a Mercedes, living in a 3-story house with an infinity pool, wearing designer clothes, and everything else she was entitled to. Larry then interrupted his wife's reverie and opened a document in front of her, saying it was a joint checking account for the couple. Diana quickly signed her name on the lines indicated by her husband. Next, Leo handed the document to his lawyer and surprised everyone, saying that the third reason for celebration that night was the most special of all. "What could be better than becoming a millionaire, my dear?" Diana shouted to him. Larry then made a sign, and Mrs. Marta entered pushing a wheeled suitcase. Upon seeing the elderly woman, Diana went pale and felt lost for a few seconds. The guests didn't understand either. Larry then announced that he was celebrating the fact that his mother was responding well to a new treatment and that, very soon, she would be living with him again. Everyone applauded as mother and son hugged. Diana tried, but couldn't show happiness as her legs were weak. After all, what was all that? Larry then explained in detail for everyone to hear how his wife managed to deceive him and keep an elderly and sick woman away from him. He made a point of reading aloud 2 letters written by Diana, which sparked a general revolt. Some guests whispered, and others began to leave. Diana simply didn't know where to put her face. With hatred in her eyes and gritting her teeth, she approached Larry and whispered that it wouldn't end there, that she might not be a studious person, but she knew her rights very well. "This millionaire contract you're going to sign is mine too," the woman said. Larry replied that she would only get half of what they both had until yesterday's date, before the $1 million sale happened. And at that moment, Diana let out a mocking laugh. "If you think I'm going to accept these terms, you're more foolish than the lady, your mother," the woman ranted. "You've already signed," Larry replied, calmly pulling out a business card from his pocket and handing it to his wife. "This is my lawyer's number. He's already gone, but you can explain over the phone all the details of the document you signed today and that he has in his possession. And if you insist on fighting for something that isn't yours, I'll make you lose everything in court for putting a sick elderly woman in a nursing home without her consent and that of her only son." Diana screamed and struggled, needing to be restrained by security, while Larry and Marta Watson left the party hall. "Forgive her, my son. You don't need to stay together, but forgive her," said the elderly lady. Larry rested his arm on Mrs. Marta's shoulders and said, "Maybe one day, Mother, when I have your wisdom. Now, and until our last day together on Earth, I just want to give you what I promised, Dad." Weeks later, the renovation of Mrs. Marta's old house was finished. Larry bought it and preserved all the memories of his family. Now, he and his partner were starting a new project together, but this time they were closer than ever. If you liked the story, please leave a like. Subscribe to our channel, and until the next video.